Hello, my name is Sohrab, and I'm a PhD student of comparative literature in Canada. And this coming series of videos, I am going to talk about Iranic language, literature, and culture. You must
You must have heard the story that happened in Iran in 2022, and it is still ongoing. After a 22-year-old girl named Gina, or Mahsa Amini, was killed by the morality police, and after 40 years of oppression, the women of Iran started what many named the first female-led movement of contemporary history. Their main slogan, as you may know, was Zan, Zendegi, Azadi, or Woman Life, Freedom. A slogan which is rooted in the ideology of freedom fighters of Kurdistan, and the brave men and women who riot not only against the tyranny of Iran and Turkey, but also against the terrorism of ISIS. Because Mahsa Amini was a Kurdish Iranian, at her funeral, people started to chant Jin, Jian, Azadi, or Woman Life, Freedom in Kurdish, and thus began the first female-led movement of the world in Iran. As we are witnessing another attack both inside Iran and in Syria on Kurdish people, it was only fitting to begin this series I have long promised with a short talk about this iconic Kurdish woman. But how a country that most of the Western world tend to see as a third world nation can have one of the most progressive movements? The answer is in the Iranic culture and history. The less common word Iranic is used instead of Iranian to emphasize that we are talking about an anthropological group who share more than 4,000 years of history before the modern-day notion of nation-state made them put up borders, and only some of them end up inside the borders of the country named Iran with an Iranian nationality. In this sense, Kurdish people who are descendants of Medes are also Iranic people. So do Afghans, Tajiks, Armenians, Baluchis, and many other ethnic groups. There are even groups who are not anthropologically Iranic, but have been living alongside Iranic people for so long that they have found more commonalities than diversities, like Turkmens, Hazara people, Uzbek people, Assyrians, Azeri people, and so on. A feminist revival for Iranic people has been long overdue. It was inevitable as the Kurdish freedom fighters showed the first signs of it years earlier. There are about 4,000 years of culture behind this. People in Western countries consider feminism as something pertaining to the modern world, but for Iranic people, it is something that has always been there, although it rarely found the chance to surface. As only an example, the Persian language, the official language of Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, and also one of the official languages of Uzbekistan and Dagestan, is a fully genderless language. You can say the same for many, although not all, of the other Iranic languages as well. Even going back to ancient Iranic creation story, none of the gods have a gender. The later manifestations of demigods and goddesses have, but even then, the main 3 or 4 gods remain genderless. The first human that was created in Iranic mythology had no gender, and unlike Eve, who was created from Adam's side, gendered humans in Iranic mythology had no hierarchy. After the first genderless human died, from his body a rhubarb plant grew, and the first man and woman bloomed out of the plant simultaneously and equally. Many Iranic mythological kings and heroes are female characters, and they fight and rule as well as their male counterparts. When I first emigrated to Canada, I could not even understand the importance of gender and the correct use of pronouns for these people. Not because I'm an insensitive person, or do not recognize personal identification and the impact of language, but because I lived my whole life in a culture which was not as misogynist as the Western culture, and in my mother tongue, we didn't have gendered pronouns or even nouns, so I learned to think about the world in a genderless way. It was a cultural shock for me how much gender was central for Westerners in their identification, something I later understood. After all, just as my ancestors had thousands of years of genderless thinking, people of European descent had thousands of years of gender bias, and that creates intergenerational trauma. So this centrality of gender identity was viable, but it took me a year to understand it. Also, I said that Western culture is more misogynist and has more gender bias. It is important to define the differences between gender bias, misogyny, and patriarchy. Because my country is without a doubt more patriarchal than most Western countries, something which itself is another reason that a feminist revolution was inevitable. Gender bias is having unconscious presuppositions and predefinitions about genders. I don't claim you do not find it in Iranic culture, but it is definitely more prominent in the West, given the genderless background of Iranic culture I just told you about. Misogyny, in its simplest definition, is just a general feeling of despise towards women in society. Again, this one is something totally Western, and I dare say biblical. Iranic people, as well as Muslims, may not treat women fairly all the time, which is the result of patriarchy, but there is no feeling of despise correlated to gender. Which brings me to the third concept, patriarchy. It is that hierarchical superiority given to men over women in society. This one is the one that you can find more in the Middle East, and the West has successfully decreased it over the past 2 centuries. Iranic culture of which I talked, and its mythology and ancient beliefs, all date back to a time before the Muslim conquest of the Greater Iran, also known as the Persian Empire. So, while under the influence of Islam, Iranic people adopted some social principles of Abrahamic religions. They kept their culture of no gender bias and no misogyny. Women in ancient Iranic religions, like Zoroastrianism and Mithraism, were equal to men, as the mythology obviously shows. In later Iranic religions like Zoroastrianism, they still have freedom of choice, social esteem, and a right over their mind and body, literally mentioned in some religious texts, including Avesta. Thus, when a culture, which is so strong that resided for more than 3,000 years almost intact, is under the pressure of another one, in this case Abrahamic culture, this clash of cultures makes an explosion inevitable. One of the most important of these clashes was the clash of the role of women in Abrahamic religion for Iranic people after the Muslim conquest, and the role of women in Iranic culture itself. This clash, like a seismic force, was accumulating under the surface of society for 1,500 years, and what we have been seeing in the past few years is the explosion, the inevitable earthquake.
So please like, comment, and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this video and you want me to go for other aspects of this culture as I mentioned. And write your suggestions in the comment section as well about how I can make these videos better, and if you think this is a series worth watching in general. And I appreciate your support if you can support me and buy me a coffee at least. I'm a student. The link for that is in the description. پاینده باشید.